I'm reading the intro right before chapter 11. Do not speak of the criminal arts, writes Mary Hightower in her pamphlet, The Evils of Paranorming. Do not speak of them, do not think of them, and most of all, do not seek to learn them. Attempting to influence the living world can only lead to misery. Chapter 11. The Haunter. Nick and Alia had not been out in the rain since they crossed into Everlost. Drenched to the bone took on a whole new meaning when the rain passed through you on its way to the ground. Sleet is worse, Leaf said. The old pickle factory was just where Scully said it would be. A white brick building on Washington Street that at some point in its life crossed over into Everlost. A heavy steel door was ominously ajar. Nick did not like the look of it. Why do I get the feeling this is a really, really bad idea? Because, said Allie, you're a certified wimp. And so to prove that he wasn't, Nick was the first to push the door open. Bad idea or not, no more complaining. He had made his decision and he was going for it. The instant he stepped in, the aroma snagged him. There was a rich smell in the air of roast meat and garlic, hitting him with more ferocity than the pelting storm. The aromas were so wonderful they made Nick weak at the knees. The building had been gutted, leaving nothing but clouded windows, a concrete floor, and black girders holding up the floor above. Hanging from the ceiling was the source of the wonderful smell. Roast chickens, turkeys, and smoked fish hung from meat hooks. Entire salamis hung from strings. It's true then, said Allie in a charged whisper. The Haunter can rip whatever he wants right out of the living world. I'll never doubt you again, said Nick. Wow, was all Leaf could say. They were so awed by the hanging feast it took them a few moments to notice the small afterlight sitting cross-legged in the center of the concrete floor. He looked frozen there, as if he hadn't moved for many years. His glowing had a yellow tinge to it and shimmered faintly against the gray walls. I've been waiting for you, said the Haunter. Nick found his feet, not wanting to move forward, until Allie whispered in his ear. He probably says that to anyone who shows up. He's just a little kid, said Leaf, but Allie shushed him. The three kids approached the seated figure. The light was dim, but as they got closer, they could see that even though he had died young, the Haunter was a very, very old spirit. Physically, he couldn't be any older than 6, and yet there was such a sense of age in him, he might as well have been a withered old wizard. The clothes he wore barely looked like clothes at all. They were fur stitched together, perhaps to protect him from an ice age that had passed 20,000 years ago. Tell me why you have come, the Haunter said, in his high-pitched voice. He had only one visible tooth. Perhaps it was because most of his front baby teeth had come out shortly before he died. We heard you can teach people to haunt the living world, Allie said. I teach nothing, he said. Either you have the skill or you don't. Then he reached into his lap and produced a smooth stone the size of an egg. The Haunter looked at the stone for a moment, as if it held the wisdom of the world. Then in one smooth motion, he hurled it at Nick. Catch it, he said. Nick held up his hands, but the stone passed right through his chest and hit the floor behind him. This wasn't an Everlost stone. It was an artifact of the living world. The Haunter laughed in his very little kid voice. Pick it up, bring it to me, he said. How am I supposed to pick that up? The same way I did, said the Haunter. Nick went to the stone, leaned down, and reached for it. His fingers closed on it, but passed right through it, just as he knew they would. He tried again, concentrating this time. Nothing. The stone didn't even wobble. Fine, thought Nick. He'll point out how completely useless we are, then he'll start teaching us. Nick stood up and turned to the Haunter, anxious to just get on with it. I can't, said Nick. I can't pick up the stone. In that case, said the Haunter, your lesson is over. Then he snapped his fingers, and there came a thundering that had nothing to do with the weather. The steel door behind them slammed itself shut. Then down a flight of old wooden stairs came a dozen figures wrapped from head to toe in black robes, and they headed straight for Nick. Before he knew what was happening, dark gloves stopped, hands lifted him up off the ground. Stop, what are you doing? The price of failure, said the Haunter, calmly, is an eternity to think about it. And then they turned Nick upside down and plunged him headfirst into a pickle barrel that had crossed over into Everlost, along with the building. It was still full of slimy saltwater brine. Then they slammed the cover back on, and Nick found himself submerged in salty, liquid darkness. For a horrible instant, he thought he might drown there, but realized he couldn't. The brine was in him and around him. It sloshed through the place where his inside should be. It filled his mouth and nose, yet still he did not drown, and never would. Alia stared at the barrel, paralyzed with disbelief, listening to Nick's angry, muffled screams from within as the dark-robed figures nailed the lid on tight. So, this was why no one ever returned from the Haunter. How could she ever been so stupid to take this risk, to make her friends take the risk? I did this to Nick, was all Alia could think. I made him come here. Alia looked at the other barrels. Were those barrels full of others who failed the test, unable to die, yet unable to escape, left to pickle in their own thoughts for all time? The other boy next, the Haunter said. Leaf shook his head. No, I don't want to. I just want to go. Bring me the stone and you can go. He looked at the faces of the kids around him, but they didn't seem to have faces beneath the dark wrappings. I don't like this game, Leaf cried. I don't want to play. Let him go, Alia demanded. What kind of monster are you? The Haunter only gave her a single-toothed smile, then turned to Leaf again. The stone. With no choice, Leaf went to the stone and tried to lift it. He grunted in frustration with each grasp, and Alia suddenly found herself thinking of that stupid arcade game where a claw tried to scoop up a stuffed animal. The claw almost always came up empty-handed, and so did Leaf. No! The Haunter's goons were on him, and although Leaf and Alia tried to fight them, there were just too many of them. Leaf was plunged into another barrel, kicking and screaming and sloshing brine across the floor until they nailed on the lid. Alia could hear his sobs from within the awful brine. Then the dark figure pulled open the lid of a third barrel and waited. Bring me the stone, the Hunter said to Alia. Alia always prided herself on being cool in a crisis and coming through when it really mattered. She had to figure the angle here. She had to think them all out of this. I'll bring you the stone if you release my friends. The Haunter did not move, did not bat an eye. Alia knew she was in no bargaining position, yet still the Hunter said, Agreed. Your friends for the stone. So this was it then. She had brought them out here, and only she could get them out. A stone on the ground, it seemed such a simple thing, but she reached for it with the same terror with which she would have reached for a burning coal. Grabbing the stone was like trying to grab a shadow. Her fingers passed through it again, and she found herself angry at the stone, a stubborn piece of the living world, refusing to admit she existed. I am, she wanted to shout at it. I exist, and I will move you. Still, her fingers passed through it again and again. Enough, said the Haunter, and his goons advanced on her. Move, you stupid stone, move! Alia forced every ounce of her will to the tips of her fingers and closed them again over the smooth rock, and again her fingertips failed her. But this time, the stone wobbled. Suddenly, the goon stopped moving, and the Haunter stood up. The entire world seemed perched on the tips of Alia's fingers. Go on, the Haunter said. Alia reached for the stone one more time. She had made it wobble. She had moved it. The knowledge that she had done it gave her an inkling of faith that she might do it again. This time she reached for it with not just her fingertips, but with both hands, and she tried to scoop it up with her palms. I will not leave my friends in those barrels, she told the stone. I will not be a victim of this monster child. You will rise off the floor. And it did. Although the stone sank deep into her ghostly hands, it came off the ground. Alia did not let her excitement break her concentration. She held her will in the palms of her hands along with that stone. It was heavy. It was perhaps the heaviest thing she had ever lifted, but she did not feel its weight in her muscles. This was a weight she could feel on her soul, and the strain was so great she felt her spirit would tear apart. Slowly, she moved toward the Haunter, and his goons backed away. Here's your stone, she said. He held out his hand, and she brought her hands over his. The stone lingered in her hands only an instant longer, then it fell right through and into the haunter's open palm. He closed his palm around it. Very good. A skill is best revealed when one has no choice but to show it. Free my friends. 5 years of study, the haunter said. What? You have shown your skill. Now you must develop it and discover what other skills you have. Because where there is one skill, there are more. Study with me for 5 years, and then I shall free your friends from their barrels. Alia took a step back. That wasn't our agreement. The haunter showed no expression. I said I would free them. I never said when. This time, instead of coming up with a clever, well-thought-out approach to the situation, she found herself lunging for the haunter, which of course did no good because his goons were there to hold her back. Their strength seemed unnatural even for ever-lost spirits, and in a moment she found out why. In her struggle, she gripped at the scarf covering one of their faces, and when she saw, terrified her. She should have known something was wrong from the beginning. If afterlights all wore the clothes they died in, what were the chances of finding a team of goons all shrouded in black? These weren't afterlights at all. They were shells, and when Alia peeled back the scarves from the faces, she saw nothing behind it, just cloth curving around the back of a head that didn't exist. Alia screamed, reached for the other faces, and one after another she revealed them as empty, soulless soldiers. The trick was part of the haunter's skill, wrapping cloth around empty air, creating soldiers out of nothing. The more Alia screamed, the louder the haunter laughed. Handless gloves gripped her tightly and carried her to the door. Come back when you are ready to learn, the haunter said. Then they pulled open the heavy iron door and hurled her out into the street, slamming the door behind her. She tried to push herself up on her elbows, but found she couldn't, and realized she was sinking into the middle of the living world street. She struggled to free herself, but only became more deeply embedded in the asphalt, which seemed more like tar trying to take her down. A garbage truck rolled over her, its wheels rolling straight through her head like it wasn't there, and it only made her angrier. Angry enough that one of the rear tires blew as it crossed through her. The truck slammed on its brakes and pulled over to the side of the street up ahead. Did I blow out that tire? But if she did, she didn't care. Not now. With a heavy force of will, she pulled herself upright. Now standing waist-deep in the asphalt, she worked her legs and pressed with her hands until she had pulled herself out of the street. She ran to the door of the haunter's lair. For a quick moment, she forgot that it was not a living world door and slammed into it with full force, as if she could pass through it. She bounced off the solid steel, almost landing back in the street. She pounded on the door over and over and ramming her shoulder against it. She tried to climb in through the windows, but they were eternally blocked with security bars that had crossed into Everlost along with the rest of the building. For hours she tried to find a way in, and by dawn she was no closer to freeing her friends than she had been when she started. As the jet-dark sky became the motley gray of a stormy morning, the rain turned to sleet, and the pinpricks of rain passing through her became sharp darts of ice. Discomfort, but not pain. Never pain, which just fed her rage. This dead, not dead state robbed her of right to feel with her body, and she made the anguish of her soul all the more severe. Come back when you are ready to learn, the haunters had said. But Alia already knew that she would never be his student. She was no monster, and neither would she study under a monster. She would be back, though. She would come with a force of 300 kids. Mary's kids. They would tear the place down brick by brick if they had to, until there was not even a ghost of a building.